Thank you very much. Let's try it again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. Welcome to our CGI seminar today. On behalf of Dan Cronin, President and owner of CGI, thank you for taking time out of your days to discuss what we find is just exciting topic of ACA and what's going on. I don't know if you guys know, but we just elected a new president about a month ago. I don't think you guys have heard anything really going on leading up to or after. So it's a pretty exciting time in our country. But what ifs? Over the last 3 years, there's been some major legislation that's passed that the government thought would be very easy for everyone in the room to administer. And it's been it's kind of been like just a nice slow boat ride, hasn't it been? Or maybe the Excel roller coaster down at Walt Disney is more like we like to say it is. But anyway, we have a couple of our team are here today at CGI. We've got Lisa Sullivan, who's an account executive. We've got Scott Collins, who is a benefit advisor. Our CEO, Jeff Watson, is here. Catherine Robley, our Director of HR and Compliance, is here. I think I may have messed that up a little bit. We also have Dee Frappia, who without Dee, you wouldn't have this, you wouldn't have that, you wouldn't have anything. She keeps us all straight when it comes to our seminars. So thank you, Dee. I'm just going to get right into introducing our speaker. Peter Marathas is a partner at Marathas, Barrow, and Weatherhead. He is one of the nation's leading employee benefits and executive compensation lawyers. He is widely recognized by clients, opposing counsel, and national law firm, making organizations as amongst the best in the field. Peter's technical knowledge is widely acknowledged as top tier. Oh, top tier. Sorry, it was hyphenated and I was trying to figure out what that word was. He has over 20 years big firm experience and a solid national reputation as being among a short list of employee benefit attorneys who can guide his clients through complex federal and state benefits, compensation laws and taxes, securities, ERISA, and corporate governance issues in a sensible, efficient, and understandable manner, which we love because let's bring it down to our level because 6,000 pages of a law is really easy to interpret. He works with individual executives, management teams, boards, and compensation committees across the country, recommending him as a go-to lawyer who provides clear advice on all matters related to the design and implementation of employee benefits as well as compensation programs. He's a prolific author, writer, and active speaker on all employee benefit matters, including the requirements of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Employers nationwide engage Peter to help them understand and meet the compliance demands of these complicated laws. Prior to practicing law, he just hasn't been doing that all. He's also had a successful career as an HR professional, which I think is a great partner when you're talking law and also what's the nitty-gritty of how to get what you need to do every day. He was an adjunct professor of law at the Boston University College of Law, and he's taught at the University of Illinois and Bradley University. If that wasn't enough, he has served in the Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana, West Africa, and among his many achievements, I'm in awe. Peter obtained a major grant to construct a secondary school in a remote village in Western Ghana, and before co-founding the firm he is currently a partner in, he was a partner at Proskauer Rose, K&L Gates, and Mintz, Levin, Cohn, Ferris, Glovsky, and Popio. Popio? Popio. Popio, see, I gotta trust my inner self. I'm just kind of in awe with this, never mind what we're gonna talk about. And he probably does stuff fun too, like hang gliding, stuff like that, Peter. Without further ado, here is Peter Marathas. Yeah. You're welcome.
Well, that was fun. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Boy, you spend too much time on our website, and our public relations people need to be reined in a bit. As we were standing back there chuckling as it kept going on, I remember my youngest now is 18 and about to leave the house. So this is a long time ago. When she was in second grade, I got one of these letters saying that I had been named a best lawyer, right? And they send these to thousands of lawyers across the country. My daughter went in and told her class that her dad was the best lawyer in the country. And that night when I went to the parent-teacher open house, that's how this guy, well, I understand he's the best lawyer in the country. I don't know who decided that. I'm like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing and so far from the truth. Thank you for coming, and thank you for having me here. I always love to come up to Manchester and see folks up here. And I guess we're streaming today, so don't let the small size of the room fool you. There's apparently lots of people who are tuning in by internet. I think it's Asimov. Don't hold me to this, but one of the science fiction writers. Are we okay?
Keep going.
Okay.
Don't mind me.
Okay. It's almost impossible when somebody is sticking their hand near your mouth, and don't mind me. Is a science fiction story. I read it many years ago. And it's a murder mystery set in the 21st century. And it's the first murder they've had in over 50 years. Because nobody goes out of their homes anymore. Everything is done through this box on their table. If you want to go to a meeting, you send a hologram. But nobody leaves their houses, so they couldn't figure out how somebody could be murdered. And, you know, I think of that story, and it was written probably in the 60s. Just an amazing story that somebody could think about the future, because we are getting there. I mean, we're Amazon talking about opening up supermarkets with no employees. You just go in and take stuff off the shelf. I don't know what we're all going to do, but, you know, we're certainly heading there. So anyway, thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm going to use my crystal ball a little bit to talk about what I think the future is going to hold. We're a small enough group here in this room, so if we get a discussion going, that would be great, because I'm sure you all have questions and ideas about what's going on and how it's going to impact our world, you know, the employee benefits / human resources world. And as interesting as the last 8 years have been, and I think they've been very interesting for all of us, buckle up your seatbelt. They're about to get a lot more interesting. I don't know if they're going to get better or worse, but they're going to get interesting or stay interesting. For myself, and I'll get into this, if you've heard me speak before, I have no use for either of the major parties or the politicians who populate them. The most interesting thing in Massachusetts is watching the ads from New Hampshire, because in Massachusetts it's always a done deal. You know, Hillary Clinton doesn't have to run an ad in Massachusetts. She wins Massachusetts. Donald Trump doesn't bother, right? We have, you know, the closest race we've had in years was between Scott Brown and Elizabeth Warren. So imagine our delight watching these really nasty ads between Jean Shaheen and Kelly Ayotte, right? You have politics up here, not like ours. I have no use for any of them from either party. I'm sure they're all very nice people, but as I'll talk about today, so much of what is said on the campaign trail is nowhere near accurate. However, I have to say this. I am thoroughly enjoying how outraged the national media and the local media are about Donald Trump winning the election. Whether you're for him or against him, you have to enjoy the fact that these people are just completely bewildered by this. And even supposedly all news organizations like WBZ, you can't help but hear it when they're reading. You know, this morning they announced that Pruitt, you know who this guy is, the Oklahoma Attorney General? He sued the EPA in the past, and now he's going to be the head of the EPA. The outrage in the news reporter's voice this morning on the radio, I was just loving it, because, you know, I think it's great, I think it's great shaking things up in Washington. These people can't even comprehend it, and it's coming out in all kinds of ways. So it's interesting. I'm fully prepared for the next 4 years that everything that is done is going to be just outrageous, and how could they do this? But that's the fun of it. So let's talk about today the post-election outlook, what the 115th Congress is going to look like, what's going to happen with Obamacare, what does it really mean to say repeal, what stays and what goes. If we are going to replace it, what does it look like? Talk about the agencies. Aside from generals, which apparently President-elect Trump thinks that generals have all of the answers because he's populating his cabinet with quite a few generals. He's putting people into positions that are, it's almost funny. It's almost like a Monty Python movie. You know, pick the most severe critic of HUD, right? Ben Carson, and put him in charge of it. Pick the most severe critic of the EPA, Pruitt, and put him in charge of it. Pick the most severe critic of HHS, Congressman Price, and put him in charge of it. It's fascinating stuff, and that's going to have a big impact on the regulatory regime, which I think will be helpful to business, actually, from my perspective. It will rein in some things that we've been seeing. Talk about staying the course. The law is still the law, and we need to talk about that and make sure that everybody just doesn't stop what they're doing, because it is the law, and until it's not the law, you really have to comply. And then I'll actually end with some updates, including one that is happening today or tomorrow that isn't on the list because we had to get the slides here early. Let's talk about the post-election outlook. For the first time, nobody in this room can remember it. That's how long ago it was. There is a unified Republican House, Senate, and White House. The Democrats, the last time they had it was in 2010. That's when they passed Obamacare. So we'll see what happens now that the Republicans, right, are the ones that are in the majority and can call the shots. The Democrats hoped to pick up at least 5 seats so they could take back a majority of the Senate. They picked up 2. Governor Shaheen, now Senator Shaheen, is one of those 2 here in New Hampshire, but they failed to pick up the rest of them, which is fairly interesting looking at those races across the country. The 2 that they picked up, Kelly Ayotte was viewed across the country as somewhat vulnerable, not because she did a bad job, but because she was running against a very popular governor with a good track record. So that was for her. The other guy to lose his seat was a guy in Illinois who everybody had him doomed from day one. So they knew they had that one, but they didn't pick up any of the others. Despite Nancy Pelosi's prediction that they would take back the House, which was a pipe dream, they picked up 7 seats in the House. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a minute, but it means that it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for Donald Trump to get things done than it has been for Barack Obama for the last 6 years under a divided system. The big news, and you hear this a lot, is that the Republicans continue to pick up executive seats across the country and state legislatures. And this is, I'll come back to this later, this is very important because I think the states under a Republican regime are going to get back a lot of the power that they've lost over the last 10 years or so, even more, maybe 16 years. They lost a lot of power in the Bush administration as well. And when that happens, it really then becomes very important what those state legislatures look like. They don't look like Massachusetts, where the Massachusetts state legislature is 98% Democratic, and the governor is a Democrat masquerading as a Republican. I mean, that Massachusetts is not the model. Don't look at that, or don't look at California. That big swath of red across the middle of the country, the Republicans are taking back control of the states in large margins and picked up 2 more governors. What's really at stake? This is interesting, right? The Supreme Court pick. Anybody, I read things maybe other people ignore, but there is an idea floating around Washington right now that on January 1st, the Democrats could vote in President Obama's pick for the Supreme Court. And how could they do that? They could do that by delaying, letting the existing senators leave and delaying swearing in all of the new senators so the Democrats would have a majority, and then nominating or approving the nomination of President Obama's choice. When you see this, completely ignore it, okay? It's silly. It's somebody who's smoking pot, which it's somebody who doesn't understand, frankly, a damn thing about how this country runs. There are so many problems with that scenario, not the least of which it would be political suicide for the senators who engaged in it, many of whom are up for election in 2 years. But there are other procedural problems with it. But if you see that, that'll be floated around. There's no doubt at all that the Republicans are going to have the pick of the Supreme Court. And that person will be young, probably in her or his 40s. So he or she is going to hang around for a long time, presumably. And there's a lot of things going up to the court that restoring that balance of 4 conservative justices and 4 liberal justices with Kennedy in the middle will make a difference. Beyond that pick, it's no secret that Justice Ginsburg has been sick for years. In fact, when Scalia died, it was a shock because nobody, you know, if you have a death pool in the Supreme Court, nobody had Antonin Scalia. Most people would have had, frankly, Justice Ginsburg because she has, I'm not sure it's pancreatic cancer, but she's got some form of a problem with her pancreas and other things that are going on there. In the next 4 years, I think that they'll pick up another seat on the Supreme Court, and that'll have a generational effect. That's the big deal. That's looking forward. What's the 100-day plan? This guy is not waiting to be sworn in. You know, he's already insulted the Chinese, right? More importantly, and much more delightful to me, he's insulted John Kerry, who got his nose bent out of shape that the president-elect would deign to meddle into foreign affairs without consulting with him. I think Secretary of State Kerry may have been absent that day when they taught in the Constitution the pecking order of people in the federal government. He's already out there making pronouncements. So this is a presidency that is going to do things very quickly. He's got the Congress behind him. He's got what he perceives as a mandate. You know, the response was what Michael Moore was on television last night, right? It's a great country where we can have a guy like Michael Moore running around and not being locked up, in my view, right? Because in some countries, they wouldn't allow somebody like that to run around. He's talking about disrupting and all of that. He understands that a lot of things are going to happen, that this is a presidency that is not going to sit by idly and not take action and actually follow through on some promises. He, of course, was making the point that the president-elect didn't win the popular vote, right? Who cares, you know, at the end of the day? It has nothing to do with who the president is, and it certainly has nothing to do with the perceived mandate that the president-elect thinks he has. Repeal of the ACA, he ran on that. He's got to follow through on that. What he's going to find out is that's going to be a lot more difficult to do than he thinks. I'm sure he already knows that. He's not a dumb guy, despite what people will portray him as a buffoon. You don't build up that kind of an empire and be a dumb guy. And he does have smart people around him, and they know the difficulties, but more on that in a minute. But the message is don't believe everything you hear on the campaign trail. There's certain things that happen when laws go into effect, and a big part of the ACA is entitlements, and it's very difficult to take away entitlements in Washington. Plus, there's the reality. the biggest stumbling block for the Republicans to just do everything they want are the procedural rules in the Senate. And this is a rule that everybody talks about, but a lot of people don't understand, and that's the filibuster. Filibuster can kill most laws, not all, but most proposed legislation. If you don't have a 60-vote margin to stop the filibuster, they can just keep talking, like Ted Cruz reading Dr. Seuss for hours on end until people give up and go home, okay? We saw this with the passage of the Affordable Care Act back in 2010, right? The reason the Democrats used reconciliation was because when Scott Brown got elected, think about how much has changed here. They lost that 60-vote ability for the filibuster. They controlled the Senate by that much. So when Scott Brown got elected, they had to use reconciliation to pass the Affordable Care Act around the filibuster. So the filibuster is still alive and well. Harry Reid, when he was the head of the Senate, did water it down a little bit, but it's still very much alive. And Mitch McConnell does not appear to be the kind of guy that is going to mess with Senate procedures, because he understands completely that the pendulum swings back and forth. So they have that to contend with. So just outright repeal of the Affordable Care Act isn't going to happen because they don't have that 60-vote Senate margin to overcome the filibuster. Which is interesting to me because the whole law was passed by reconciliation, right? And so why can't the whole law be taken away through reconciliation? And the answer is because of some very arcane Senate procedural rules. Only parts of the law, but some key parts of the law, can be done by reconciliation. So you're not going to see a huge change right away. The House is still very much in control of the Republicans, 241 to 194. That's a huge margin. I don't see that shifting anytime soon. And so whatever Trump and Paul Ryan can agree to will get passed in the House. And they've found some kind of rapprochement, which, frankly, on the campaign trail, I didn't think was ever going to be possible. I also never thought I'd see Donald Trump and Mitt Romney sitting down to dinner together either. So with the kinds of things Mittens had to say about Trump. So repeal. It's not possible right out of the gate within 100 days just to repeal the whole law. That's not going to happen because of the realities in the Senate and the realities of the public, okay? All of these people here stand for election every 2 years, okay? That's the People's House. They're accountable every 2 years. Most of them get reelected. It's part of the problem with this country is the incumbents just get elected too often. My opinion. You may have a different opinion. But those people have to go back to their jurisdictions. And none of those people will want to go back to their constituents and say, I was the woman who voted to reimpose evidence of insurability or pre-existing conditions on everybody. I mean, that's not a very popular thing. This is a very popular element of the law, right? So this isn't going anywhere. Trump had an interview, I think it was with 60 Minutes, maybe somebody else, where he indicated that, you know, after meeting with the president, he confirmed that this wasn't going anywhere. But he said this on the campaign trail. He understands this. These are parts of the law that have been popular. I would hope, it's a fool's hope, okay, that they'll look at this intelligently in Washington, okay? See, there I go. What they did with the ACA was stupid, okay? What they did with the ACA is to say no pre-existing conditions, no showing of evidence of insurability at all, okay? What does that promote? That promotes very bad behavior. That promotes people who get the mindset that, well, I get one shot every year to get on the insurance, I'll take that bet, okay? Because they know if they show up at a hospital, they're not going to get turned away, right? And if they get turned away, they're going to be put in an ambulance to another hospital that will take them, okay? So they know that. So they play a game. And they figure, you know, every year I'll take an assessment, and maybe this year I'll buy insurance. So you have people buying insurance when they're sick, okay? Or they think they're going to get sick or whatever. They want to get pregnant, whatever it might be, okay? This promotes very irresponsible behavior, and it promotes a very problematic system. And that is that people are, it's adverse selection at its very worst. People are adversely selecting into insurance when they need it, okay? We want everybody in the insurance pool all the time. When I say we, I mean the business community, okay? That's in our best interest because that helps premium rates stay low, okay? The broader the insurance pool, the better the chance of keeping costs down, okay? So the ACA, because frankly they passed the law before they ever read it, but frankly I'm not sure they would have understood it anyway based on some of the comments I heard back in 2009, 2010, took up the Massachusetts model of no pre-existing condition for everybody, which was mystifying to me because frankly the Kennedy-Kassenbaum law, that's what HIPAA started out as, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, okay, which, by the way, you can find this element in Hillary care from the early 90s. So this is an idea that actually started with Secretary Clinton many, many years ago. Not started with her, but she promoted it. The idea was, and we all know it, right, because this has been group health plans prior to the Affordable Care Act, plans can have pre-existing conditions, but they have to offset the time of the pre-existing condition by periods of insurance prior to coming on. What does that do? It promotes good behavior. It says to people, if you stay in the insurance pool, okay, pay the premium, stay in, then you'll never be subjected to pre-existing conditions, okay? If you drop out, well, then there's probably a reason why, and we want to protect ourselves in the pool, okay? I don't see this happening because I don't think they're thoughtful enough in Washington, although with Tom Price as head of HHS and maybe directing in the cabinet room what legislation might look like, they might take a relook at this and reimpose those kinds of rules. They'd have to give everybody, you know, a one-time break, let everybody in, but then they could implement it going forward, and that would solve not all of the cost issues, but a significant part of the cost issues in many of the states. So I think this is staying. My hope is that they'll actually look at it and re-implement a rule that actually worked, as opposed to a rule that really is a cost driver unnecessarily. What else is likely to stay? Coverage for adult children. Okay. Again, you don't want to be the congressman who goes back to his district and says, I took away health insurance for your 25-year-old kid who can't find a job. That's not a good way to get elected. So this is very popular, okay? It's also common sense, right? It's a quick, I call this a quick kill. About 17% of our population is between the ages of 18 and 30. Sometimes it seems to me they make up 90% of the population. I know I'm going to offend some people here, but talk about amusement. For somebody like me, okay, and I know there are a lot of gray-haired people, some gray-haired people in this room who can relate to this. Okay, my dad quit high school at 16, okay? Now, there's some debate about whether or not he did this voluntarily or if some judge said to him, you know, son, but he quit high school at the age of 16 to sign up to get into the tail end of World War II, okay? And went over, he didn't see any action. He was in Berlin for the cleanup, so he was subjected to sniper fire, but he went and did that, okay? Completely self-made guy. Well, the postscript on that, for those of you who are interested, he never got a high school diploma, built up a couple of very successful businesses. We didn't live, you know, we weren't wealthy, but we lived okay. When he was dying, the local veterans organization showed up and gave him a diploma from his high school because they were identifying people like my dad who had done that. And that's when my dad said to me, you think I should tell them that it really wasn't a choice? But nah, don't tell them that. My dad, as many people of that generation, you know, believed in self-reliance, right? And I'm not making this up. When I graduated high school, after the ceremony was over, my dad said this to me. He gave me a hug, he leaned in, and he said, congratulations, good luck, let us know how it works out. And that wasn't a surprise to me, okay? I knew that was coming, okay? Today, this group of people, right, they get medals for showing up, all right? So no end of amusement to me to see the hissy fit they collectively threw across the country when they didn't get what they wanted on November 8th. What do you mean she doesn't get a medal for showing up? She showed up. It's not how it works. Let me save you some steps afterwards, okay? Because I make these comments, and there are millennials in the room, and then they come up after me and they tell me why I'm wrong to say those things. You are the exception. That's part of the millennial mindset, right? They need to be. All right, enough slamming on them. They do seem to take over society. They make up about 17% of us. This is a very positive provision in the Affordable Care Act. It's an insurance mandate. It says to the carriers, hey, you can't arbitrarily throw a kid off the plan when he gets to 19 unless he stays on school. Who thought of these rules? Well, they were tax rules. That's what drove them, right? That's not going anywhere, particularly in what has been a very sluggish economic recovery. We've had a recovery, but it has been sluggish, and particularly hard hit is this age group, finding it difficult to find jobs that provide benefits or full-time work that provide benefits. And this is a group of people we want in the insurance pool, right? They're generally healthy, okay? The biggest problem with them is protecting them from themselves, right? They do dumb things, particularly the males, not the females. Their brains form a lot faster. I have 3 girls and a boy, so I can tell you that I've seen this up close. We have a cabana out back in the backyard, and one Sunday morning I went in there to clean it up, and there was a huge hole in the wall that wasn't there the day before. So I went and I said to my son, what happened? He said, Dad, I wish I could tell you. We were sitting there, and 1 minute Richard just got up and ran through the wall for no reason. This is a good friend of his. And we both laughed about it because this is Richard. His brain isn't formed. It won't be for many years. So the thing that you have to do with these people is protect them from themselves, but you want them in the insurance pool, okay? So this is a good thing. I would say, again, 26, which is what the law says, they took that from the Massachusetts law, okay? I wish they would look at it because I think it's too low. I think we could really help ourselves out here by requiring group health plans and insurers to extend coverage up to, say, age 30. And many states have laws like this. 26 was the standard Massachusetts set many years ago, but many states passed laws afterwards. Anybody know what's the oldest of these types of laws in the country? In other words, what's the oldest that insurance carriers are required to have children on group health plans? Anybody know? 29 in Florida. Who said 31? What state? New Jersey. If Snooki celebrates her 30th birthday on her parents' group health plan, I don't know if she's older than 30 now. She probably is. Seems like she's been around. She's like the Kardashians. It's like they've always been here. Who would have thought, right, back in 1994, that the insult to society that Robert Kardashian made didn't end with his representation of O.J. Simpson? Sorry, that was tortured, but you get my point. If Snooki celebrates her 30th birthday on her insurance group plan, she gets to stay on till 31. All right? That seems old. My dad is probably rolling over in his grave, frankly. Not to speak disrespectfully, but he would look at that and say, what? Right? That's a grown-up. My dad had 3 kids before he was 31. Okay? But it's a different world. It's a more sluggish economy. So I would have them take a look at this. I tell you, I don't want to get too bogged down in the stories, but years ago, many years ago, I was in New York when the law passed. And I was in a room like this, and my daughter, who was pursuing a singing career, she wasn't then, she was in college then, was in New York. I don't know what she was doing in New York because it was too many years ago for college even. But in any event, she came to hear me speak in a session like this. And I used that Snooki thing, okay? And I said, and I had been saying it in meetings across the country, if Snooki celebrates his 30th birthday, right? And afterwards, Sarah said to me, Dad, you know Snooki's a girl, right? Like, no clue. I don't even know what Snooki is. I just hear the name. And it's associated with New Jersey. Nobody ever corrected me. All right. So that's likely to stay. Don't see that going away and hope they actually can look at it and make an adjustment. I think, the insurance carriers squeal and say that it costs them too much money, right? But that's nonsense. That is a healthy group of people. Whatever cost there is overwhelmed by the fact that you've got all of these healthy people in the pool at relatively low cost. Some changes I would make. If somebody's eligible for insurance on his own employer's plan, I would allow the employer to do a carve-out. In Massachusetts, it's not uncommon for somebody to be on a plan like mine, a very small company, at 24 and have a job at Raytheon where he could have all kinds of group health coverage but stays on my plan. He should go on Raytheon's. Again, this might be too thoughtful for the people in Congress, but not too thoughtful for Congressman Price. He understands these issues. Annual and lifetime maximums, okay? Now, before I was a lawyer, as you heard, I had a real job. I was in HR, okay? My whole career, it has struck me as a raw deal that insurance carriers could take premium every month from people over the course of their lifetime, and then when they get to be 40, 50, 60 years old, they have some serious illness or sickness, and the carrier says, oh, sorry, you've exceeded your lifetime maximum. Right? That's an unfair deal, okay? And the Affordable Care Act addressed that with respect to essential benefits. This isn't going away. No congressman's going to go back to her district and say, I reimposed lifetime maximums. This is also, despite all of their kvetching, a very low-cost item. The truth of the matter is that when we had lifetime maximums, they were typically $1, $2, $3 million, and it was very rare that anybody got those kinds of numbers. Very rare. So the incremental cost of going to no lifetime maximums, in truth, was next to nothing. But if you talk to people at Blue Cross or Anthem or Cigna, they'll tell you it was just outrageous how much it cost them, okay? So that's staying. Same thing with annual maximums. There may be changes in what essential health benefits look like. I'll talk about that a little later on the regulatory scheme. Also, I think you'll see tax credits to small businesses staying, subsidies to purchase insurance and exchanges. This is the big one, right? The promise of the Affordable Care Act was affordable insurance that is accessible. And if you think back to before 2010, if you were a small business owner or an individual, it was almost impossible to get access to low-cost insurance. It's still somewhat impossible, okay? Unfortunately, premium rates increase, it's very expensive, so they're going to have to find a way to cure that. What I don't think this administration and this Congress can do is take away the entitlement that we've created to subsidies. I just don't see it. I know it's on certain people's hit list, but nobody's going to want to go back to his district and say, I'm the one that got you kicked off your insurance because you couldn't afford it anymore. Now, they're going to have to find a way to pay for that, but I think that's staying. Medicaid, I think we'll see some enhancements there. And if they can go to some kind of block funding just means that they say to the state of New Hampshire, here's your money, here are some parameters, you know your population better than we do, use it as you think best. In other words, empowering the states again, which has not been the case for the last 16 years. Yep.
Peter, if they keep that, they're subsidizing the individuals under the state of these exchanges, are they still only going to really assess the group health plans at 3.6%, really pay for that, or is there going to be a better way to perhaps come up with that money?
Can I put a pin in that because I'll come back to paying for it? And I just want to build a little bit here on some of these things. But they do have to pay for it, and that means we have to pay for it. How's that for a teaser? Okay. I think you'll find, and by the way, it's not talked about, but the Medicaid expansion, and you remember this part of the law. This part of the law said states would create the ability for people to get insurance based on what they make in a year. That's all they would have to show under Medicaid. Okay? Supreme Court ruled that the way they wrote that into the Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional because they basically put a gun to the head of the states and said, you'll do this or you'll lose all of your Medicaid funding. Okay? So that made it optional for the states to take Medicaid expansion. That has created a real problem in this country. The majority of the states, 36 or 37 of them, have not adopted Medicaid expansion. So what happens? If you're in Texas, which is not a Medicaid expansion state, and you make between 100% and 133% of the federal poverty level, you're not eligible for a subsidy under the exchange because the law doesn't permit it. So your insurance rates are triple or quadruple what people who are at 134% of the federal poverty level. That's asinine. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. If they can find a way to fix, and the reason, Texas did it because Rick Perry was the governor and it was really a political stand. Most of those states did not take Medicaid expansion because they couldn't handle yet another unfunded requirement from the federal government. The federal government was basically saying, we're not going to change how we let you spend the Medicaid dollars, but you're going to have to take on this extra burden. If they can link block funding to Medicaid expansion, it's an entitlement, but it solves for at least one part. And I hate to use the term, I'm not sure it's politically correct, but it's accurate. The working poor, the people who are out there actively working, but aren't making enough to really afford insurance. If we can fix that across the country, we'll see rates go down because that money is coming in. That's common sense. Okay? Something that has eluded, frankly, Washington for a while. I'm hoping they can focus on things and work with the states. Okay? Medicare reform, it's actually elements of the ACA that are working are parts of the Medicare reform requirements. I say that knowing that parts of Medicare reform, this is where you get into this death panel stuff. Now, they don't call it, you can't do a search of the regulations of the law for the phrase death panel, right? But you can find under Medicare reform rules for our aged population about how much hospitals will get on return visits. If you have somebody who's 84 years old and she goes to the hospital and she's getting Medicare funding, if she's back in that hospital 3 weeks later, they're going to take a hit. Okay? And that is working to reduce healthcare costs, but personally, I'm not sure that's the society we want to be, because what we're doing then is encouraging those care providers to say to that 84-year-old woman, you know, don't come back to the hospital if you get really sick. And that is happening. But parts of Medicare reform are happening and are reducing cost. I think they need to tweak this a little bit, but that's not going to go away. Okay. What is likely to go? The individual mandate. You cannot underestimate how much the individual mandate is hated by conservatives in this country. Okay? They don't talk about it anymore because that fight was lost at the Supreme Court. Most of these people, very hardcore, have dartboards in their basements with Justice Roberts' picture on them because of that decision. Okay? And I get it. This is the part of the law, frankly, that is most troubling to me. Because if you break it down, this is what the law says. 350 million Americans must buy a product from private enterprise. And if they don't, they will pay a penalty to the federal government. We've never had a law like that. We've had it for one very discrete purpose that had to do with national defense many, many years ago. We've never had a law, and I was on a panel after the law passed down in Florida, down in Miami, which is a very conservative part of the country. You would think it isn't because you got Miami Beach and all of that, but it is very conservative. And I was on the panel. There was the regional vice president for Cigna or Blue Cross was on the panel, and then there was this young Democratic lobbyist who was on the panel. She very quickly became irrelevant to the discussion because in her opening comments, there were like 300 people in the room. She said, "I'm not afraid to call it Obamacare because after all, he does care." And I thought, my God, you have no idea what room you're in. You know, this will fly in Bethesda. Hell, this will fly up in North Florida, maybe, but this ain't flying down. You could hear a pin drop. And she's looking around, looking for that, you know. Anyway, it became a discussion between me and the guy, the insurance guy. And he was talking about the individual mandate, going on about how great it is and how it helps the system to work and how important it is. And the moderator said to me, "What do you think?" I said, "I'd love a law that required everybody in this country to hire an ERISA lawyer." Who wouldn't, right? So this is the part of the Affordable Care Act that is definitely going. It'll go quickly. It'll go, frankly, quietly, I think. More on that in a minute. The employer mandate, I don't know. I struggle with that. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary at a federal level. I think employers provide group health insurance for a whole bunch of reasons, not because they're told to do so by a federal government. I think that the experiment in Massachusetts has proven that out. But parts of that will probably go away, maybe not all of it. And the Cadillac tax will disappear, but to your question, the Cadillac tax will disappear. In its place, yet another, at least another single tax or a couple of taxes to take its place. But the Cadillac tax will likely disappear. Remember I mentioned earlier that they would have trouble repealing all of Obamacare because of the filibuster in the Senate? Reconciliation is used for tax laws, okay? The theory in the Senate is that there are some things that are so important to the country, like raising money and spending money, that you don't want to be held hostage in that way. Okay? So what they did is they took a Senate bill, okay, and dropped it into an existing House bill that was a tax law, called that the Affordable Care Act, passed it in the House, and then sent it over the Senate using reconciliation as a tax law. That's basically what they did. The constitutionality of that is very much in question in my mind. Under the Constitution, all tax laws have to originate in the House. The House is the people's delegation, right? And remember, this country was founded on people who didn't like to pay taxes, so they wanted to make sure they had close control of that. Reconciliation is used because they feel like they need to raise money. Here's the hysterical part, and I wish Harry Reid were still in the Senate, because I would just love to hear his take on it. The guy is such a crazy person. The things he says are just astounding. They will likely, if they have to, use reconciliation to repeal these parts of the law, okay? Because these are basically tax laws, okay? How very quickly we will hear Nancy Pelosi, who doesn't really have a say in it because she's in the House, and the Senate minority in the Senate talk about how awful democracy is being upended by the use of reconciliation. Okay? I love that kind of irony. When I hear that kind of hypocrisy on the television, I just love it. I laugh like hell. And I love it from either side of the aisle, by the way. It's not just when it's one party that does it. They will be foist on their own petard, okay, on this one. Which, again, the irony is lovely, but I think that's what's going to happen with this, if they need it. I'm not sure they need it, by the way. The problem in 2 years is that the Democrats could lose significant seats in the Senate. They have quite a few seats up for re-election. And although it appears that the senators and the congresspeople who live in California and Massachusetts and New York don't get it, the people in the middle part, you know, the flyover part of the country, very much heard what was said in this election, okay? So you may well see some Democrats jumping on board here because they're looking to be reelected to the Senate in 2 years. They may not need reconciliation, but they can. All right. I mentioned this. This is an historic first. By the way, I get questions all the time, you know, well, that's not accurate. Everybody's forced to pay into Medicare. You see the difference between Medicare and this law, right? Medicare is a federal program. Okay, this is a law that says you will buy, what kind of business are you in? You work for a private school. Who wouldn't love a law that says everybody has to send at least one kid to a private school? You'd love that law, right? It'd be wonderful, right? That's why this rubs people the wrong way. The efficacy of this law has always been suspect, okay? In Massachusetts, we still have an individual mandate, okay? Separate and apart from the federal mandate, okay? How fair is that, okay? Has it done a thing in Massachusetts? Now, if you listen to the politicians in Massachusetts or pointed-headed idiots like John Gruber at MIT in Massachusetts, you would think, yes, it has. I beg to differ. According to the Boston Globe, before they passed Massachusetts health care in 2006, on average, Massachusetts citizens, between 94% and 96% of them, had insurance. Okay? If you think about the way Massachusetts, everybody lives pretty much east of Worcester, right? There are members of my family, if you ask them to go out to Springfield, they'll say, I don't go anywhere if I have to get shots and a visa. Okay? Most people who live east of Worcester never leave that area. And in that area, you've got healthcare, you've got financial services, you've got defense contractors, you've got employers that provide insurance. So before the law passed, 94 to 96%. You know where we were after the law passed? 94, 96. Didn't move the dial at all. Okay? The day I was banned from watching Sunday morning news shows, okay, was the day Barney, I want to say Barney Fife, but that wasn't his name, Barney Frank, congressman from Massachusetts, former congressman, was on one of those shows talking about how well it's worked in Massachusetts. We have a 95% coverage rate in Massachusetts. So what? We had that before you passed this law. Same thing is true nationally. This does not provide if you walk up to somebody and say, are you afraid about not having insurance? And they'll look at you and say, what? It's the last thing on their mind. All right? And there's a couple of problems with the law and why there's no efficacy. One is the penalty is just too low. Now, if the penalty was the actual cost of insurance and they went out and collected it, then it'd be easy. People would say, oh, it's dumb. I'm going to have to pay it. I might as well get the insurance. That's number one. Number two, that same Supreme Court decision that I referenced earlier, Chief Justice Roberts said, it's basically a tax, so we can only collect it from people through their tax returns. You can't, there are no ACA police that go and knock on people's door and say, you owe this tax. So if you're making $24,000, $25,000 a year, and what you get every year from the federal government is a refund on your taxes, and you use whatever service you use, and you put in there that you didn't have insurance, and it says that you're not only not going to get a refund, but you owe the government $200, you're not going to file. And that's been happening. And the IRS isn't going through filing. They don't care, okay? They're happy to keep the money. They don't care about that person, okay? Lowest learner or the lowest learners at the IRS don't really care about those people. They care about people who make a lot of money. So this is one I see going. I don't think it's necessary. I think this administration is going to be looking for carrots instead of sticks, okay? What is likely to go? Parts of the employer mandate, okay? What parts of it? I don't know, okay? There are some people in the Republican side of the aisle who believe that employers have to be encouraged to provide group health insurance, all right? So some of this may stay, but if they were to take all of it out, well, in the words of the president-elect, that would be huge. Okay? That would be really huge. Think of the impact. Without the employer mandate, we don't have the 30-hour rule. Without the 30-hour rule, we don't have all of the ridiculous rules related to counting hours. This concept of variable hour employees that we've all learned and now understand. Right? Right out the window, gone. Okay? It's as if, I'm really going to date myself here, right? It's as if Bobby Ewing came out of the shower and it was all just a bad dream. Okay? You millennials will have to Google that. Oh, this is a great story. I don't usually tell these stories, but I travel a lot, so I'm in a lot of places. One time I was staying in the Ritz on Central Park. And I was staying there on points, by the way. Yeah. I wasn't charging a client for that. And I was sitting in the club lounge. And the name of the actor just escaped me. The guy who played Bobby Ewing, what's his name? Patrick Duffy. Was sitting beside me reading a book. Okay? And because I travel a lot, I do from time to time run into people. And I typically don't You know, I don't want to be the Chris Farley, oh, remember when you were in Dallas? What do you say after that? Now, my exception is when I meet politicians. Like I met John Sununu in Logan, and I said hello, and he and I talked for an hour. It was incredible. It was a delightful conversation. I sat down, I looked at him, and I said, he lives. And he looked at me and he laughed. He said, good one. And I knew he meant not a good one, not funny, you know. Very dated. And I left him alone, and he closed his book, and we started chatting about what I do and obviously what he does. That he was down filming the new version of Dallas. And we're sitting there, and the door opens, and in walks James Spader. Okay? Now, how bizarre is that, right? And Patrick Duffy says to me, James Spader, I hate that asshole. Get up and walked out. I thought, now that's funny. Anyway, all of that off of a random joke about all of this being a dream for the last how many years. All of these rules go away. Affordability, the variable hours we talked about, manual value, minimum value reporting. Do you believe it'll all go away? I'm not so sure. I think they're going to feel like they need to keep some element of the employer mandate in place. I don't agree with them, but I think it'll be difficult. But look at that stack. That's a real stack of regulations that the majority leader is standing beside. And most of those implement those rules. Isn't that amazing? So even if it goes away, it's going to be quite a challenge to unwind a lot of this stuff. But it'll be interesting. I do expect a big part of it to go away. But what do I mean by maybe it won't all go away? Well, 30 hours a week was completely random, okay? And it was established by people who, let's face it, have never had a real job, okay? They picked 30 hours because on a good week, maybe a federal worker works that many hours. Like I said earlier about the millennials, if your husband, brother, son, sister, daughter, cousin, nephew, grandparent works for the federal government, I'm sure they're the exception. Okay? You don't need to come up and tell me that not all federal workers. We were watching Jeopardy one night. There was a federal worker on, and he said that every day at 2:30, everybody in the office watched Jeopardy. And I looked at my wife. I said, can you? Well, it's one thing they do it. It's another that he feels like he can admit that publicly. Right? 30 hours is completely random and has been crushing for some certain industries. This industry, the hospitality industry, and a lot of industries. Okay? Education. Rules like this have been very difficult to deal with. Okay? So if they kept it, I think you'll see different rules around that. But I'm not sure they're going to keep it. Okay? Again, I don't want to over-predict, but I think parts of it will stay. Most of it will go away. Maybe it'll all go away. What are they going to replace it with? Well, if you listen to the political commentators and the pundits, they'll tell you that the Republicans don't have an idea of what they want to do. That's simply not true. Congressman Price has presented every year for the last few years a comprehensive reform package, okay, that has been co-sponsored in the Senate. Of course, it's gone nowhere because the president going to sign it and they couldn't get over a veto anyway. But in those, that's one guy. There's others. Orrin Hatch and others have proposed laws that are very comprehensive and give us a pretty good idea of what we might see in terms of replacement. We're not going to see all of these things, but we're going to see some of these things. These are ideas that have been floating around. First and foremost, allowing the sale of group health insurance across state lines. Okay? Now, there is a federal law, it's called McCarran-Ferguson, that essentially says that all of the states have the right to regulate insurance at the state level. Okay? And what that has created is fiefdoms, 50 different fiefdoms across the country, and a situation that, frankly, the insurance carriers love. New Hampshire is a prime example. How many carriers you have here that legitimately? Yeah, maybe 3. Tennessee, 1. All right. So there are, imagine if insurance carriers could sell across state lines. And imagine you wake up to a world where your friends here are shopping your account to 10 or 20 different carriers. Okay? Now, what will that look like? We don't know. How will that be regulated? But people say to me, well, why do you think that will help? I don't know. I grew up believing in capitalism and competition. I think it always helps to have competition. Okay? There are counter-arguments. Some people say, no, it'll just create more issues and it won't lead to good competition. What it'll lead to is Cuba. Okay? Not Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, but we'll end up with Cigna, United, Blue Cross, and Anthem, and they'll be selling across state lines. Everybody else will be driven out of business. So there are...
Yeah, well, there's one aspect of that, too, because, you know, rates are very directly tied to insurance costs, right? And with the exception of the national insurers, as you mentioned, there aren't many that would have payment arrangements with providers in each state. So, you know, I kind of fail to see how it...
That's the counter-argument, right? So the argument is it would promote competition. The counter-argument is it would do exactly the opposite. That very strong regional or state insurance companies would be driven out of the market or consumed by Cuba or some iteration of Cuba, which ultimately would not be good. So this is an idea that's out there. I think they're going to study it and try to figure out. You can always modify things to give protections, I guess, but it's a real concern, and it should not be ignored that there are very good reasons why. The arguments for reduced administrative expenses and fostering new approaches, again, go into that column. There are certainly arguments on the other side. Increased use of tax-favored vehicles is always preeminent. And frankly, you know, consumerism is something we've been promoting for many, many years. Getting people to understand that they should have a bucket of money that they're going to spend, and if they're going to have an MRI done, maybe it's a good idea to check with 3 or 4 different providers to see who has the best cost of an MRI, instead of just going where the orthopedic surgeon says go here. Okay? These are good ideas. Now, I'm not going to wait till the end to talk about new developments. But the CURE Act, have you heard about the CURE Act? CURE Act is huge, okay? The CURE Act has passed now the House and the Senate. It's basically focused on pharmaceuticals, but it includes a provision that says that small employers, those who are not applicable large employers, under 50, can use HRAs for their employees to allow their employees to buy coverage on the exchange. Big news. And the president will sign that. I don't know how much business you have in the small plan space, but now that doesn't mean there's not a role for you there, because you can help and assist and set that stuff up, but it's a very positive development overall for employers. And frankly, if this type of bipartisan approach to these things had started back in 2010, we wouldn't be where we are right now with Obamacare with so bad ratings, okay? This is a good fix. This is basically Congress saying to the IRS, what are you, nuts? Okay, because the IRS completely created this whole rule that you couldn't use HRAs in this way. There was no basis for it in the law. The IRS just created that rule, okay? I think the president will sign this today or tomorrow. It'll be effective in 17. There are limits. I think it's all employer funded, so you can't do deferrals to it. You got to do it for all of your employees, with certain exceptions. Under 25, you don't have to do it. Part-time, you don't have to do it. It's limited to $49.50 a year for single coverage and $10,000 a year for family coverage. And it does have an impact on the subsidy your employees can get on the exchange. So this is big news. You'll see more. We're going to release shortly our blurb on it, so you'll see it. Okay? So you heard it here first. How's that for up to date? Okay. Allowing individuals to deduct premium cost 100%. Again, this is something the candidate talked about a lot. Tax credits and subsidies for premiums. Tort reform. Tort reform, I love listening to the arguments from the tort lawyers, okay? Because it just proves to me that they were paying attention that final year in law school when we were all forced to take the course in making ridiculous arguments, okay? Their arguments are typically twofold. One, you can't measure the impact of personal injury suits on the costs of providing health care. You can't measure it, and it's not that much. How can it be both? You either can't measure it, or it's not that much. But those two things don't go together, right? In fact, I think everybody knows intuitively that we practice way too much defensive medicine in this country, okay? Everybody has their stories. You know, mine, my 83-year-old mom, when she was, frankly, in the last few months of her life, you can imagine how much they enjoyed me showing up at Boston Medical Center, okay? One day, I walked into her room and I pulled her chart, and the nurse came in. "You can't read that. That belongs to the doctor." I said, "No, it belongs to my mother." I said, "Do you give me permission to read your chart?" She said, "Yes, I do." I said to the nurse, "There you go." So she storms out in a huff. And I read that my mother, who is frankly dying from terminal cancer and has not been told this, has been slated for a colonoscopy the next day. And I said, "Did somebody talk to you about this?" She said, "No, they just said that they'd, take me down in the morning." You know, my mother, she grew up in an age where you listen to these people, right? I go out to the desk and I say, "What's with this colonoscopy for my mother?" "Dr. So-and-so ordered it." "Well, get Dr. So-and-so down here." "Well, I'm sure he's busy." I said, "Yeah, I'm effing busy too." Okay? I wasn't very nice about it. I said, "I'm not leaving till he comes here. So unless you want me to camp out here, you'll get him down here." 2 hours later, he shows up and we go out and we have a conversation. "Why are you doing a colonoscopy on my mother?" "Well, blah, 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 blah." Mindless comments that make no sense. On and on and on. Stop. I've heard enough. You're working off of some med-mal checklist, and it tells you should do a colonoscopy because some nurse thinks she detected blood in my mother's stool. Do I get that right? And he said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, cancel the order, and if I find out you did it, I will swear out charges of battery against you." And he's looking at me and I said, "And believe me, I don't make idle threats." Not many people have me who can read a doctor's chart and who can have the sense to say, "What the hell are we doing here?" Now, I get it, okay? From his perspective, he's following the checklist. But that has a direct cost on how we provide services, okay? And I think we can all agree that subjecting my mother to a colonoscopy is the last thing anybody needed to do, okay? I hate to get personal with that, but everybody has a story. You talk to people about that, and it's out there. Will they get tort reform nationally? Probably not. The counter-argument to tort reform is it does have a disproportionate impact on certain segments of society, okay? The truth of the matter is that more things can happen to women generally in terms of medical care that can screw up their whole lives than can happen to men. All right? If somebody makes a mistake, there are things that can happen with women, younger women particularly, who want to have children, that this doesn't even enter in typically into the equation with men. You get my point. I don't want to get too graphic. So tort reform, if you don't allow for people to pursue claims, can actually cut off rights to some people. And I get that counter argument. That's actually a legitimate argument in my book and something we have to solve for. When you go to states like Illinois that have enacted tort reform, you find that they found a way to figure that out, to separate the wheat from the chaff. All right? Because we have a lot of bad malpractice claims in this country. Okay? So tort reform, provider price transparency. Right now, it's a fiction. Okay? Block grant Medicaid to the states, we talked about that, and removing prescription drug barriers. If you read our regulations, you would believe that the only people who know how to make drugs are people who manufacture them in this country. Do you think that's true? Now, I served for 2 years in Ghana, West Africa. I would not buy prescription drugs manufactured in Ghana, West Africa. All right? They're lovely people, but I just don't think even today, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is later, that they've developed safe practices. But Germany, France, Canada, England, why not? So that's something they'll look at. Just dealing with the anti-competitive practices across the country in certain segments would be a big change. What do I mean by that? Right now, 2 providers own 75% nationally of the ESRD market, end-stage renal disease. Fresenius and DaVita. Public enemies number 1 and number 2 as far as I'm concerned. And if you work for either one of them, I apologize. To you, not to them. All right? Because of the way Medicare works, Medicare caps their payments for a certain period. If you have somebody who has ESRD and you have a self-insured plan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it kind of flips. After Medicare pays for a while, the plan pays. What happens is that the industry charges the plans like 1,000% of not just what Medicare paid them, but of the cost of the services to recoup what they're losing on Medicare. Okay? Things like that have to change. Now, I'm a free market guy. I believe in competition and capitalism. However, when it comes to health care, I think we have to start regulating it, my opinion, like we do electricity and water. And if we get that kind of mindset where we look at these providers and we say, yeah, no, you can't do that, that to me would be okay. I don't know how that'll fly with some of the more conservative Republicans. That's the kinds of things that's being talked about. All right, paying for it. Finally, to your question, right? How do we pay for all of this? Medicare and entitlement reform is always top on everybody's list, but it ain't going to happen. All right? Although I will say this, welfare reform will probably happen. Anybody see the report? It was Howie Carr. Howie Carr had a report from Massachusetts. He filed a Freedom of Information to find out how the welfare dollars were being spent and where. Took the Commonwealth 18 months to respond. Okay? And when they did, it was unbelievable how much of the money on the EBT cards and everything else were spent in Orlando, Puerto Rico, Miami. All right? Now, that's unrelated, but that same type of stuff happens. So people believe if they could get a handle on that, we could control costs. It's hard to do. Taxes, to your point, it's inevitable. How will they do that? to your specific question, I think we're going to see a phase out of the tax preference of employer-provided insurance. So I think the excise tax will go away, but I think, and the 3.8% passive tax for C corps, et cetera, that's going to go away. To make that up, I think, because this is part of every Republican proposal, that they will phase out the tax preference on employer-sponsored health insurance. There's two different ideas that are out there. One is to phase it out based on the cost of coverage model. And that's more like the Cadillac tax. Once it gets to a certain point, then the tax preference goes away. The other is to focus on the income of folks. And after a handful of years having us all report on the W-2 on what we provide for insurance, they've built up a pretty good database in Washington of where that phase-out might occur. Okay? Now, again, I'm not in favor of taxes, but if you're going to pay for this, that seems to me, and this is my opinion, you may have a different opinion, that's okay. If I'm making, and I'm not, $1 million a year, and the federal government is saying to me that the $36,000 a year in premium benefit that I get from my employer is no longer tax-free, that's a first world problem. That's my view. It's a different story, and that's what, on the lower end. And they're going to have to find that number. Because I don't think it's $90,000, $95,000 a year. I think it's like $200,000, $250,000 a year.
What about the employer's share?
Same thing. Phase out on both sides. If the employer is picking up part of it, it'll become a taxable benefit to those people. Now, some people say, well, doesn't that mean that companies will stop providing executives with insurance? And the answer is no. They still have to compete for people. It's still the marketplace where we deliver insurance. And I think that we'll just, we'll deliver it on a taxable basis.
At what level, and will that be enough money?
I don't know the answer to either one of those two questions. I do know the answer to the second one. No, not nearly enough. They're going to have to find other ways to generate revenue. We simply don't have, when you listen to Liz Warren, please don't. When you listen to Liz Warren, talk about taxing people at the higher end, you can tax them all you want. It's not going to make that kind of a difference that you think it's going to make. That's your point. At what level, I hope anyway, that they're understanding that, I hate to say this, but $150,000 isn't all that much anymore. Particularly if you live in a place like Boston or even up here, right? New York, LA. So I think it's going to be more than what they've been thinking. It'll start to phase out, kind of the reverse of the IRAs, where you need the phase out ability to contribute. So I don't know the number, but I do think it's coming. I do think that as much as Republicans hate taxes, if they take away the employer mandate, there's just going to be a broader tax because they still have to deliver the insurance. Now, we all hate, you live in a state, how politically incorrect is that? You live in a state where on your license plate you're telling people, I would rather die, right, than not be free, which I think it's always been my favorite motto. I live by it. I don't live up here. Taxes, though, I say this, I've been saying this for the last 10 years that I've been on the road. I have never yet met the person when I say to him, do you think it would be right for your neighbor to lose his house, everything he's worked for over his life because he gets cancer late in life? And I have yet to find the person in this country who says, yeah, that's a good idea. Right? We live in a society that understands that we don't want people to lose everything because they got sick. Now, I'm not willing to go as far as Ted Kennedy or Bernie Sanders and say it's a right. I think we throw that around too much. But I do think it's a privilege of living in a civilized society, a first world society. So taxes will go up. I don't know how much. And this is just one idea, paying for it, right? What else is going to happen, though? If they start to dismantle the employer mandate, the states will rush in. They already have a model in Massachusetts, a failed model in my opinion. Okay, but they've had some experience now with the Affordable Care Act and with the Massachusetts law, and the states will likely, some states, I don't know about New Hampshire. I could tell you 30 years ago, I could tell you exactly what New Hampshire would have thought before everybody from Massachusetts moved up here and changed the color from hard red to purple to blue, right? True? Not true? Right? This means for us, I think, bad things, right? If we're subjected to a lot of different states with rules, this is not going to be a good thing. So hopefully they can address that. Hopefully the lessons of Amendment 69, you know what Amendment 69 in Colorado? Colorado had an initiative on the ballot this year to go to single payer. Okay? I actually, it was very nice. I don't know why. They probably read the same nonsense that is written about me on the website. I got a call one day and said, we're putting together a symposium. We'd like you to come out here and speak. Are you interested? And I said, sure. And they said, what do you charge? And I didn't know these people from Adams Ox, so I threw out a ridiculous number. They said, okay. I said, really? And, you know, okay, fine. Flew me out, everything, you know, first class deluxe, to sit in a room to talk about Amendment 69, which was single payer. Colorado was going to move to single payer. Even though Vermont walked away from it because they realized that they couldn't do it, Colorado, some people in Colorado thought they could. And it was very interesting. They had people from both sides of the question on there, but it was very clear that the people in Colorado understood what that would do to Colorado. And what it would do to Colorado, since what they were going to do is assess this outrageous tax on all of the companies doing business there to pay for it, is it would completely erode their business base. People would move. You can't do things like this if you're one of 50. That's the lesson of Amendment 69. However, if there's states across the country start doing local stuff, this could actually be worse for us than even Obamacare, because then we're subjected to 30 state regimens. Not very pleasant. Executive orders and the new regulatory regime, I mentioned this, it's as if the president-elect has gone out of his way to find exactly the wrong people to run all of these agencies, okay? The Attorney General from, is it Oklahoma? Is that this guy's from, right? He has a great quote, and I'm going to paraphrase. He says, it's not the agency's duty to rewrite the laws, it's the agency's duties to interpret and implement the laws. And what's been going on in Washington, not just for the last 8 years, but as far as I'm concerned, for a lot longer than that, is that the federal agencies have basically rewritten the law. Okay? And sometimes to very odd effect. So I think you're going to see scaling back on this, and you're going to see, for example, at HHS, a relook at whether or not all employers are going to be required to pay for abortifacients. Okay? It's a hot-button issue. It's something, frankly, the Obama administration should never have taken on. Okay? Not in the way they did. And that's not a slam at them politically. It's just, what were you thinking? Didn't you have enough on your plate? You want to take on the little sisters of the poor? Okay? That case, which is headed to the Supreme Court, my guess is that whoever is Trump's Attorney General will walk away from that case and not pursue it. That's a case where they don't want any part of abortifacients, and they don't want even to acknowledge that they have any obligation with it. It's a First Amendment case. It's unlikely. What we're going to see, I think, transgender benefits at HHS. We'll talk about those rules in a quick second here. You may see those being revoked. The candidate's pledge, for every one regulation passed, 2 must go. That sounds great. I'm not sure he can do it, but if he can, that would be great. We have too much regulation. We have too much control by bureaucrats in Washington. And I personally think it's refreshing that he's putting people in positions there who are skeptical about the agency's roles. And that, in my view, can only be good for business. We'll see how that plays out. For now, stay the course, maintain compliance efforts. It's still the law. We don't know what's going to go. We don't know what's going to stay. And they still have the ability to assess penalties. Any questions on any of that? I'm very quickly going to run through some updates, but I wanted to, anybody have a challenge to anything that I mean, again, this is mostly my opinion. In fact, 90% of it is my opinion, which I'm not sure, my kids will tell you that ain't worth anything, but that's not true. My oldest daughter is a lawyer. She works for me. She would say it means a lot because she knows who pays her. The rest of them don't connect those two dots.
Do you think it's going to be difficult, or do you think it's likely that Republican-controlled House, Senate, and presidency that have been running hard on the sovereignty of states and state rights is going to, do you think it's going to be difficult for them to then, you're talking about putting federal laws in place that will allow insurance companies to override state regulations and compete across state lines? Is that going to be, is that likely?
Yeah, let me repeat it's a great question. I've talked a lot about the Trump administration and the Republican-controlled House and Senate rewriting rules and, for example, maybe implementing a law that breaks down state control of certain parts, like the insurance. And how likely is that? Remember what I said up front. The majority of state legislatures and governors are now Republican. It's not going to be a cakewalk, but I think that they're going to have a dialogue. I suspect they're going to have a dialogue, and it's going to be different than the dialogue these people have been hearing for the last 8 years. So easy no. In fact, repealing McCarran-Ferguson, you know, there's, and you'll relate to this, there's nothing so petty in state government than the insurance commissioners, okay? They're like a flea on a raft going down a river yelling, "Raise the drawbridge." Okay? They really aren't that important in the scheme of things, but yet these fiefdoms are incredible. And these guys will protect their turf. So, no, I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be hard and maybe impossible in some cases, but I think the dialogue is going to be there.
So I guess my bigger question is, you know, do you think that these lawmakers that have been, at least, I know politicians say and do different things, but they've been pretty bullish on state rights and federal government staying out of state affairs, to then turn around and say, you know, our position as a party or as politicians on this issue is we're going to take away the state's
I don't know.
ability to regulate this, and we're going to say insurance companies can compete across state lines.
Well, again, focusing on that may be a difficult thing to do. And by the way, not everybody agrees it would work. So, you know, they don't have the ability to go in and say this will absolutely work. Tort reform is the same issue. That's not something we do federally, and they would have to provide incentives at the state level. So I don't mean to suggest that it's going to be easy. I do think the mindset is going to be different. I alluded to it earlier. The Obama administration and the passage of Obamacare was very prescriptive. You will expand Medicaid, or you will lose all of your Medicaid dollars, okay? That has serious issues under the 10th and 11th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and that's why it was struck down. Those are the ones that protect states' rights. That type of gun-to-your-head approach just doesn't fly, and it doesn't fly with the opposition party ever. that can't be the approach of the Republicans and still claim that they recognize states' rights. So they're going to have to find a way to develop these ideas and get state buy-in. But I think they can do that. I think they can do it because they start from, most of them start from the proposition that states have those rights. And they have to be respectful and work with those state legislatures and state governors. My point was, since they're turning red, they're going to find, forget Charlie Baker. Massachusetts is doomed because of Charlie Baker, and his stand with Trump publicly saying he's not going to vote for him. But a lot of these guys and women have been very supportive behind the scenes or out front with this administration, and they're going to be, I think they're going to be cooperative. Okay, I was hired in 2012 or 13 by South Dakota to go out with them, to come out with them and spend time with people in their insurance commissioner's office to help them understand what the federal government was going to require under the ACA. Okay? I never forget this story. South Dakota told the federal government, no, we're not developing an exchange, we're not expanding Medicaid, we're not doing any of these things, we don't believe in unfunded federal mandates. Okay? We're not doing it. This is how they describe, in the run-up to the exchanges going live, these people every quarter would have a phone call with representatives of HHS, DOL, and IRS, and all kinds of other federal agencies. Okay, now I wasn't on any of those calls, but this is how they were described to me. The conference calls would be with all the states across the country, okay, and the states would lead it off and say, the federal government would start it off and say, we expect the states to do the following with respect to these exchanges. And it was all the federal exchange states. We expect you to build the infrastructure, the communications, the this, 23 different things. And the states would say, I'm paraphrasing, what part of we're not involved in this do you not understand? We are not doing all of those 23 things. We're not. We've told you we're not. We've told you many times we're not. So if you're counting on us to do them, this implementation is going to fail. The call would end, an email would come out from HHS. As we discussed, the states are going to be responsible for the following. That's a true story. That's not going to happen with this administration. It's just not. That's not how you get the states to come over to your side. And I think these people understand. If they don't, they're going to fail. That's the short answer, but I think they get it. And that's, at a very granular level, that's what the states have been dealing with over the years under this law. Great question. I probably went on too long with it, but.
As a follow-up on this, you talked about competing across state lines, pros and cons. I didn't hear your personal view. Which one is that?
Good for you that you're not assigning to me any personal views. I think unfortunately, somewhere in the middle. Well, I don't know what the answer to that is, but we can't have even, I think, 3 in a state like New Hampshire, although maybe 3's just right, given the size. Who knows? But I do know that in many states, there's just one carrier that controls the market, and it's a disaster. So somehow we've got to fix that. I suspect that the argument that repeal of McCarran-Ferguson really won't have the impact that they think it will is probably the right one, that we'll end up with Cuba. The only ones who can compete are the big guys nationally, and you'll drive out some very solid. We're already seeing that consolidation. That's my opinion. I don't know the answer. I think you agree with that view, right? Get you guys out of here. Just very quickly, the EEOC continues its attack on wellness programs. This Republican Congress is going to step in here and shake things up with the EEOC. I believe that. They're going to pass a law that's going to take them out of the business of where they have no business being, wellness plans. They have no business being. I don't know that we need to get into the specifics. We have 2 federal cases that say that your wellness plans fall under the exception in the ADA and the EEOC can't write any rules. We now have a federal court in September that disagrees with that view, okay? That says, yes, the EEOC can regulate because there isn't an exception for wellness programs. In that case, they found against the EEOC because they found Orion's program voluntary, which is interesting because that's not what the EEOC's current rule says. At Orion, they paid 100% of the premium cost. If you refuse to take biometric screening or participate in a health risk assessment, that was fine, but you then paid 100% of the premium cost. And the court there found that it was voluntary, that employee elected to do that, and there was no pressure, which is an odd result. The regulations would have capped that at 30% of the premium, but the court case began before they released their regulations. The main point of the Orion case is that you now have 2 federal courts, yes, 2 federal courts who disagree that the EEOC has any business even writing rules here. And you've got 1 federal court saying, yeah, they do, but they got it wrong in this case. And you've got a congressman who's about to take over HHS who will have a view here, and somebody who's going to head up the EEOC is going to be selected by Donald Trump. So all of this is going to change. What's interesting is that the AARP, which is just, I'm flabbergasted, in October sued the EEOC claiming their rule doesn't go far enough, which, you know, whatever. EEOC model notices for ADA disclosures, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have health risk assessments, if you have screening, know that next year you're going to have to use the model forum to tell people about it, how you use the information, what kind of information you're collecting and why. You guys will be all over that. I don't want to get too bogged down in the reporting. There is an extension. Don't read too much into this. This is just the extension for the forms that you provide to the individuals. Normally, you have to provide the forms to your individuals by the same time you give them their W-2s. There's now a 30-day extension. However, the filing deadlines with the IRS are still in place. Okay? We have other news about the reporting. Can we just stipulate that they've clarified these different codes? And understanding that the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. Kind of leave it like that, and you guys will check with these good people on all of that. Oh, this is one worth stopping on. There's this whole issue about taxpayer identification numbers, Social Security numbers, and the like. What's your obligation? Apparently you have to try 3 times to get it from your employees. If you've tried the 3 times, all of this up here is basically saying you've done your best. Okay? And then opt-outs, 16 is behind us. Let's go to 2017. This is when you say to somebody, if you don't take our insurance, I will give you some money. Okay? If that, the opt-out must be conditional. Okay? It must be conditional on them having insurance someplace else that is minimum essential coverage. If it's not, the value of that opt-out will be included in for purposes of determining whether or not your coverage is affordable. And again, you guys are all over this. Okay? All right, so again, I started, I think, by saying that I don't have a crystal ball. I can only tell you what I think based on the conversations I have and the people I talk with and the things I'm reading, which are the same things you're reading if you're interested in this stuff. We're in for a change. I don't think we're in for a change in the first 100 days. I think it's going to take at least 2 years for them to implement change. And while they're implementing change, you got to stay the course. So continue to work with these folks. Make sure you stay compliant. And let's be careful out there. All of these things. There you go.
Wonderful.
What are we giving away?
We're giving away some fun stuff. We have a gift certificate to Tuckaway Tavern in Epping. We have a JBL speaker.
Wow.
And we also have a candle from Yankee Candle Assortment. So Peter, if I may ask you to do the first poll, that would be fantastic.